is Maria Fernandez, and for 15 years I worked as a specialized caregiver in the homes of some of the wealthiest families in Boston. I've cared for elderly parents, sickly wives, and children with various conditions. I've always prided myself on my professionalism and discretion. That all changed when I took a position with the Anderson family. Richard Anderson was a biotech billionaire, famous for developing revolutionary medical devices that had saved countless lives. He lived in a sprawling estate outside the city with his much younger wife, Victoria, and their 10-year-old son, Elijah. On paper, they were the perfect family. Wealthy, influential, and philanthropic. The reality I walked into was far darker. I was hired specifically to care for Elijah, who had been diagnosed with severe autism and physical disabilities. According to the medical information I was provided, he had been born with a rare neurological condition that left him unable to walk. He was mostly nonverbal and required round-the-clock care. The Andersons had gone through 5 caregivers in the past year alone. During my interview, Victoria explained this away by saying that few people had the patience and expertise required to handle Elijah's complex needs. From the moment I entered their marble-floored entrance hall, something felt off. Victoria, tall, blonde, and immaculately put together, showed me around the house with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. She spoke about her son in clinical terms, as if describing a difficult project rather than a child. Richard was absent, apparently away on business, as he often was. When I finally met Elijah, I was taken to a specially designed suite on the 3rd floor of the mansion, far removed from the main living areas. The room was filled with expensive medical equipment, sensory toys, and monitoring devices. It looked like a pediatric hospital room rather than a child's bedroom. Elijah was sitting in a custom wheelchair, looking out the window at the extensive gardens below. He was small for his age, thin, with sandy blonde hair that needed cutting. When I entered, he didn't turn to look at me, which was consistent with the autism diagnosis I'd been given. "Elijah, this is Ms. Fernandez. She'll be taking care of you now," Victoria said, her voice suddenly higher, as if speaking to an infant rather than a 10-year-old. I approached slowly and knelt beside his wheelchair. "Hello, Elijah. You can call me Maria if you like." For a brief moment, his eyes flicked toward me, intelligent, aware eyes that seemed to be assessing me. Then they returned to the window. That fleeting moment of connection was enough to make me wonder. Victoria ran through his medication schedule, which was extensive. Anti-seizure medications, mood stabilizers, sleeping aids, and muscle relaxants. The list seemed excessive, even for a child with his supposed conditions. "Dr. Winters manages all of Elijah's care," Victoria explained. "He makes house calls twice a month. He's been with us since Elijah was born, so he understands the situation completely." I nodded, making mental notes of everything. In 15 years of specialized care, I'd developed an instinct for family dynamics, and something here wasn't adding up. "Mrs. Anderson," I said carefully, "I'd like to review Elijah's full medical history if possible. It helps me to understand the progression of his condition." A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossed Victoria's perfectly made-up face. "Dr. Winters has all of that information. I'm sure he can share what's relevant during his next visit." Over the next few days, I observed Elijah carefully. I noticed several inconsistencies with his supposed diagnosis. While he rarely spoke, he seemed to understand everything happening around him. He followed movement with his eyes in a way that showed acute awareness. His fine motor skills, when he thought no one was watching, were much better than reported. Most interestingly, when Victoria was out of the house and we were alone, Elijah seemed more relaxed. He would occasionally make eye contact with me and once even reached for a book, indicating he wanted me to read to him, behavior inconsistent with severe autism. On my 4th day, I met Richard Anderson for the first time.
He returned from his business trip late in the evening, and I was surprised when he appeared in Elijah's room around 9 p.m. He was tall and distinguished, with graying temples and the confident bearing of a man used to being in charge. Unlike his wife, the first thing he did was go to his son. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice softening as he crouched by the wheelchair. "I brought you something." He pulled a small model airplane from his pocket. Elijah's fingers twitched slightly, but he didn't reach for it. Richard placed it on the table beside him with a sigh. Then he turned to me, extending his hand. "Ms. Fernandez, thank you for joining our team. How's he doing?" "He's been very calm, Mr. Anderson. We've established a good routine." Richard nodded, looking at his son with a mixture of love and sadness that seemed genuine. "That's good. That's really good." He hesitated. Has he spoken at all?" The question struck me as odd, given the extensive documentation stating Elijah was essentially nonverbal. "No, sir. Not yet." Richard's shoulders slumped slightly. "I see. Well, good night then." Later that night, after both Richard and Victoria had retired to their wing of the mansion, I was organizing Elijah's medications when I noticed something unusual. The muscle relaxants prescribed to him were a powerful type, typically used for adult patients with serious spinal injuries. The dosage seemed high for a child of his size. As I was examining the bottle, I heard a noise from Elijah's bed. He was supposed to be asleep. I'd administered his nightly medications an hour earlier. I turned to find him watching me, fully alert. "Water," he said clearly, his voice quiet but distinct. I froze, the medication still in my hand. According to all the documentation, Elijah could manage only a few simple words at best, and rarely spoke unprompted. Yet here he was, making a clear, specific request. I set down the bottle and brought him water. As I held the cup to his lips, his eyes locked with mine. They weren't the unfocused eyes of a severely autistic child. They were sharp, intelligent, and filled with what I could only interpret as a desperate plea. That was the moment I knew something was very wrong in the Anderson household. What I didn't realize was that I had just taken the first step into a dark web of family secrets, medical malpractice, and a plot so twisted that it would eventually shake Boston's elite social circles to their core. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I smiled at Elijah, wiped his mouth gently with a napkin, and put the cup away as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But internally, my mind was already formulating a plan. I needed to understand what was happening to this child before I made any moves. "Good night, Elijah," I said softly. His eyes followed me as I turned off the main light, leaving only a small nightlight glowing. Just before I closed the door, I heard his voice again, barely above a whisper. "Help me." The next morning, I began my observation in earnest. I arrived early for my shift, bringing with me a small notebook hidden in my uniform pocket. Victoria was hosting a charity committee meeting in the east wing of the mansion, giving me an opportunity to work with Elijah without her hovering presence. Instead of following the rigid schedule of therapies and medications that had been established, I made a small but significant change. I administered only half the prescribed dose of the muscle relaxants, carefully disposing of the rest. If my suspicions were correct, I needed to see how Elijah functioned with less medication in his system. By mid-morning, the difference was subtle but noticeable. His eyes tracked movement more actively, and his fingers showed increased dexterity when I gave him a simple puzzle to solve. Most tellingly, when I helped him with his physical therapy exercises, stretching his legs and arms as instructed, I felt resistance in muscles that should have been limp according to his diagnosis. "Elijah," I said quietly, making sure we were alone. "Can you understand everything I'm saying to you?" His eyes flickered to mine, then to the door, then back to me. A slight nod. "Are you able to speak more than you let on?" Another careful nod. Are you afraid of someone in this house?" His breathing quickened slightly, and he glanced toward the door again. A third nod, more emphatic. "I want to help you," I whispered, "but I need to understand what's happening. Is someone hurting you?" Before he could respond, the door opened. Victoria stood there, elegant in a designer dress, her smile fixed as she surveyed the scene. "How's our morning going?" she asked, her voice pleasant, but her eyes sharp as they took in Elijah's more alert state. "Very well," I replied smoothly. "We've just finished the first therapy session, and we're about to start on some cognitive exercises." She approached, her high heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "He seems unusually alert today." It wasn't a compliment. There was an undercurrent of displeasure in her tone. "I find that mental stimulation often helps with physical therapy," I explained. "The mind-body connection is powerful." Victoria's smile tightened. "Well, don't push him too hard. Dr. Winters has a very specific protocol." She turned to Elijah, her voice shifting to that artificially sweet tone. "Mommy's friends are asking about you, sweetheart. They're so impressed by how brave you are with your condition." I noticed Elijah's fingers curl slightly into a fist, a gesture of tension or perhaps anger. Victoria didn't seem to notice. "I'll be back to check on you before lunch," she said, dropping a perfunctory kiss on his forehead before leaving the room. As soon as she was gone, I knelt beside Elijah. "We don't have much time," I whispered. "If you can communicate with me somehow, I need you to. I think you're being over-medicated, possibly intentionally." Elijah's eyes widened, and with what appeared to be tremendous effort, he moved his right hand toward the tablet that was kept on his wheelchair tray for simple communication needs. According to Victoria, he could only use it for basic requests like hungry or tired, but I had my doubts. I placed the tablet in front of him and watched in astonishment as his fingers, though obviously weak from underuse, navigated to a notes application that I hadn't even known was installed. Slowly, laboriously, he typed, "Not autistic. They keep me drugged. Need proof." My blood ran cold. Before I could respond, he deleted the message and returned the tablet to its home screen. Over the next few days, I documented everything meticulously. I noted which medications seemed to sedate Elijah the most, and which staff members were aware of his condition. I observed that Richard, despite his demanding schedule, made time to visit his son daily, always with genuine affection. Victoria, on the other hand, seemed to view Elijah as more of a prop than a child, useful for garnering sympathy at charity events, but otherwise kept isolated. The household staff provided additional insights. The cook, Mrs. Patel, had been with the family since before Elijah's birth. When I casually mentioned that Elijah seemed more alert when given certain foods, she gave me a knowing look. "That boy was born healthy," she whispered one evening, as we shared a cup of tea in the kitchen after hours. "I remember the day they brought him home from the hospital. He was perfect, strong cry, bright eyes. It wasn't until after Dr. Winters became involved that he started to change." "What do you mean?" I pressed. Mrs. Patel glanced nervously at the kitchen door. "I shouldn't say more. People who ask too many questions about the Anderson family don't last long here. The last nanny who got too close to Elijah, she was gone overnight. Victoria said she stole jewelry, but none of us believed it." The most revealing conversation came from an unexpected source. Marcus, the security guard who patrolled the estate grounds, had worked for the Andersons for over 12 years. One evening, as I was taking some air in the garden, he approached me. "You're different from the others," he said without preamble. "You actually care about the boy." I chose my words carefully. "I care about all my patients." Marcus's weathered face was serious in the gathering twilight. "Then you should know there's something not right about that child's condition. I'm not a medical person. but I've watched that family for years. That boy walked until he was nearly 3 years old. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. Walked? But his records indicate he was born with his condition. Marcus nodded grimly. That's the official story. But I remember him toddling around these gardens, laughing and running. Then he got sick, really sick. High fever, hospital stay, the works. When he came back, he was different. Started having episodes, they called them. Then the wheelchair appeared, and the specialists, and suddenly no one outside the family was allowed to interact with him without supervision. This revelation was the final piece I needed. If Elijah had indeed been a normally developing child until age 3, then something had happened. Either a genuine medical condition that was being exploited and exaggerated, or something far more sinister. The breakthrough came on my 10th day, during Dr. Winter's scheduled visit. He was a thin, precise man with cold eyes and a dismissive manner. He barely acknowledged my presence as he examined Elijah, speaking mostly to Victoria, who hovered nearby. His muscle tone seems improved, he noted with a frown. Have you been adjusting his medications? Victoria's eyes darted to me accusingly. We followed your protocol exactly, Doctor. Dr. Winters made a note in his file. I think we should increase the diazepam dose. He's growing, and we need to ensure the spasticity remains controlled. I couldn't stay silent. Excuse me, Dr. Winters, but increased diazepam might affect his cognitive function. He's been more responsive to cognitive therapies lately. The doctor looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. And you are a neurologist, Ms. Fernandez? No, but I've worked with children with similar conditions. His current dosage already seems quite high for his weight. Dr. Winter's smile was cold. I appreciate your concern, but Elijah's case is unique. The standard protocols don't apply. After he left, Victoria cornered me in the hallway. Don't ever question Dr. Winters again, she hissed, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at my face. He's been managing Elijah's care since birth. He knows what's best. Of course, Mrs. Anderson, I replied meekly. I was only concerned about potential side effects. Her eyes narrowed. Your job is to execute the care plan, not provide medical opinions. Am I clear? Perfectly clear. That night, after everyone was asleep, I returned to Elijah's room. I had been gradually reducing his medications, and he was now much more alert during our private sessions. I brought the tablet, making sure to disable any monitoring software first. Elijah, I whispered, I need you to tell me the truth. What happened to you? His fingers moved slowly but purposefully across the screen. I got sick when I was 3. After they started giving me shots, said I needed them, made me dizzy, couldn't walk anymore. Mom told everyone I was autistic. Dad believes her. Dr. Winters knows truth. Why would they do this to you? I typed back, my hands shaking. His response made my blood freeze. Insurance policy pays $5 million if I'm permanently disabled. Mom controls money. Dad doesn't know. Need proof in Dr. Winters' files. I stared at the screen in horror. Could it be possible? Would a mother deliberately disable her own child for an insurance payout? The accusation was almost too monstrous to believe. Yet as I looked at Elijah's intelligent eyes, at the determination in his face as he laboriously typed each word, I knew he was telling the truth. Before I could respond, we heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly deleted our conversation and slipped the tablet back onto its stand. By the time the door creaked open, I was adjusting Elijah's blankets as if I'd simply been checking on him. Victoria stood in the doorway, her silk robe cinched tightly around her waist, her expression suspicious. Is everything all right? The security system showed movement in this room. Just a routine check, I said calmly. Sometimes his breathing tube gets tangled in his sleep. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes calculating. You seem very dedicated to your patient, Ms. Fernandez. It's my job to provide the best care possible. Indeed. Her voice was ice. Just remember whose house this is and who signs your considerable paycheck. After she left, I squeezed Elijah's hand reassuringly. I now had a clear understanding of what I was dealing with and what I needed to do next. I needed concrete evidence of this monstrous scheme, and I needed to find a way to help Elijah without alerting Victoria or Dr. Winters to my intentions. What they didn't realize was that they weren't dealing with just any caregiver. Before my career change, I had spent 8 years as a legal medical investigator for insurance companies, specializing in fraud cases. I knew exactly how to build a case, and how to ensure that those who had harmed this innocent child would face the full consequences of their actions. The trap was about to be set, but I would need to move carefully. One wrong step, and I could lose not only my position, but also any chance of helping Elijah escape the prison his mother had created for him. The revelation of Victoria's scheme was the confirmation I needed. I was now certain that Elijah was being deliberately medicated into disability, his condition falsified for financial gain. The depth of this cruelty was almost unfathomable. A mother systematically poisoning her own child, destroying his development, and isolating him from the world, all for money. As a caregiver who had dedicated my life to helping vulnerable people, this was beyond anything I had encountered. This wasn't negligence or ignorance. It was calculated abuse disguised as medical care. The next morning, Victoria called me into her study, an intimidating space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive desk that seemed designed to emphasize the power dynamic between us. She sat behind it, elegantly dressed as always, a tablet in her manicured hands. "Please sit down, Ms. Fernandez," she said, gesturing to a chair positioned lower than hers, a power play I recognized immediately. I sat, keeping my expression neutral, despite the disgust I felt being in her presence. "I've been reviewing the security footage," she began, her voice deceptively light. "I couldn't help but notice you've been spending significant time with Elijah during off hours. Last night, for instance." My heart rate increased, but I maintained my composure. As I mentioned, I was performing a routine check. Elijah sometimes has difficulty breathing at night. "Interesting." She swiped across her tablet. "And what about the fact that you appear to be administering only partial doses of his medications?" So she had been watching more closely than I'd realized. I needed to be careful. "Mrs. Anderson, I've noticed that some of the medications seem to cause adverse reactions. Excessive drowsiness, difficulty swallowing. I was concerned about potential interaction effects, so I've been staggering some doses rather than giving them all at once. It's standard practice for patients on multiple medications." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not your decision to make. As a certified medical caregiver, I have an ethical obligation to report potential adverse reactions. I was planning to discuss this with Dr. Winters during his next visit." Victoria's perfect veneer cracked slightly. "Dr. Winters and I have managed Elijah's care for years. We don't need your innovations." The tension was palpable. We both knew this was more than a disagreement about care protocols. "Of course," I said, adopting a submissive tone. "I apologize if I overstepped. I only want what's best for Elijah." "What's best for my son is following his established care plan exactly as prescribed," she snapped. "I hired you for your experience, not your opinions. Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear, Mrs. Anderson." "Good." She closed her tablet. "I've scheduled additional therapy sessions with Dr. Winters for the next 3 days. He's concerned about Elijah's recent changes in behavior." Translation. She was bringing in her accomplice to re-establish control over Elijah's condition. They had noticed the improvements resulting from reduced medication and were moving to counteract them. "I'll ensure everything is prepared for Dr. Winters' visits," I said, rising from my chair. "One more thing, Ms. Fernandez." Her tone made me pause at the door. "Household staff are talking about your questions, your interest in Elijah's history." I'd advise you to focus on your current duties rather than investigating the past. It was a warning, barely veiled. I nodded and left, my mind racing. That night was a turning point. Dr. Winters arrived late, around 8 p.m., carrying his medical bag. I was instructed to leave them alone. Doctor-patient confidentiality, Victoria explained with a cold smile. Instead of leaving the wing entirely, I positioned myself in an adjacent room where I could hear parts of their conversation through the air vent. "Becoming too alert," Dr. Winters was saying. "The caregiver is interfering with the regimen." "I've spoken to her," Victoria replied, "but we may need to consider replacing her." "Not yet. Too suspicious, especially with the insurance review coming up. We need stability in his care team." The mention of an insurance review caught my attention. This could be the opportunity I needed. 6 years we've maintained this, Victoria said, her voice lower. I'm not losing the trust payments because some caregiver gets sentimental. The new protocol should help, Winters assured her. I've adjusted the dosages. He'll be back to baseline within days. I heard the sound of injections being prepared. My stomach churned, knowing they were pumping more drugs into Elijah's system. Drugs he didn't need. Drugs that were stealing his childhood and abilities. When they finished, I waited until Dr. Winters left before entering Elijah's room. Victoria was still there, watching as her son's eyes grew unfocused from whatever had just been administered. "Ah, Ms. Fernandez. Dr. Winters has updated Elijah's medication schedule." She handed me a new chart with significantly increased dosages. I expect this to be followed precisely. I took the chart, fighting to keep my expression neutral despite the rage building inside me. "Yes, Mrs. Anderson." "Good. I'll be attending a fundraiser tomorrow evening. Mr. Anderson is still away on business. I expect everything to be in order when I return." After she left, I looked at Elijah. His eyes were glazed, his muscles slack. Whatever they had given him had acted quickly. I checked his pulse and breathing. Both were slow but stable. Then I examined the injection site on his arm. There would be no reducing these doses without detection. They were injected directly into his system. I leaned close to his ear. "I know what they're doing to you," I whispered. "And I promise you I'm going to stop it. Just hold on a little longer." His fingers twitched slightly. A tiny acknowledgement that somewhere beneath the pharmaceutical haze, he had heard me. The next day brought the final confirmation I needed. While Victoria was preoccupied with preparations for her evening event, a courier delivered a package marked Anderson Insurance Review, Confidential. The household manager signed for it and placed it on Victoria's desk in her study. This was my opportunity. During my lunch break, I made my way to the study. The door was locked, but years of working in large estates had taught me certain skills. Using a thin credit card, I managed to slip the latch. Inside, I located the package immediately. With gloved hands, I carefully opened it to avoid leaving evidence of tampering. Inside was a letter explaining that Barton Life Insurance would be conducting a 5-year review of Elijah's permanent disability claim, as required by the policy terms. A medical examiner would visit within 2 weeks to reassess his condition. This explained Victoria and Dr. Winters' urgency to increase Elijah's medication. They needed him to appear severely disabled for the insurance review. I photographed the documents with my phone, then carefully resealed the package and placed it exactly as I had found it. Before leaving, I also discovered something else. A small wall safe behind a painting. I couldn't access it now, but its existence was worth noting. That evening, while Victoria attended her fundraiser, I took action. First, I contacted an old colleague from my insurance investigation days, James Whitaker, now a senior investigator at the state's insurance fraud division. "Maria," he said when he answered my call. "It's been 5 years? How's the career change treating you?" "James, I need your help with something sensitive," I replied, keeping my voice low despite being alone in my quarters. "I'm working a case privately, potential fraud involving a child. "You're not with the Bureau anymore," he reminded me. "This isn't official. I need advice, not intervention, at least not yet." I explained the situation in careful terms, without naming the Andersons directly. "Jesus," he breathed when I finished. "You're talking about Munchausen by proxy combined with insurance fraud." "Exactly, and I need to know how to collect evidence that will stand up in court." James was silent for a moment. "You need 3 things. Medical evidence showing the child doesn't actually have the claimed conditions, documentation of the administration of unnecessary medications, and proof of intent to defraud. The insurance company is already planning a review." "That's good, but not enough. Insurance reviews can be manipulated, especially by wealthy clients with cooperative doctors. You need independent medical evaluation, preferably when the child isn't heavily medicated." After ending the call, I made a second call to Dr. Elena Reyes, a neurologist I had worked with on several fraud cases in the past. I trusted her completely. "A child being deliberately disabled for insurance money?" she repeated, horrified. "I can help, but we need to be careful. Collecting blood and hair samples without consent is ethically problematic." "What if the child consents? He's aware of what's happening to him." "How old?" 10. "That's a gray area legally, but if you can get samples and medical records, I can analyze them privately. Just don't tell me how you obtained them." With these pieces in place, I returned to Elijah's room. The medication they had given him was still in effect, but less potent than the previous night. I sat beside his bed, speaking softly. "Elijah, I know what your mother and Dr. Winters are doing. I'm building a case, but I need your help. The insurance company is coming to evaluate you. This is our chance. But it's going to be difficult. They're going to increase your medications to make you appear more disabled. I can't prevent that without risking my position here." His eyes, though clouded, focused on me with tremendous effort. "I need evidence. Hair samples, blood samples if possible, and access to your complete medical records. I have a doctor who can analyze them privately. Do you understand what I'm asking? This might be uncomfortable, but it's necessary." He managed a slight nod. "I also need to document your true abilities when the medication wears off. I'll need to record you. Is that okay?" Another nod. I pulled out a small medical kit I had brought with me. "I'm going to take a few strands of your hair now, and if possible, a small blood sample in the morning when you're due for your regular blood work." As I carefully collected several strands of hair from different areas of his head, I continued speaking reassuringly. "I'm going to help you, Elijah. What they've done to you is criminal, and they're going to face justice. But I need you to be brave a little longer. Can you do that?" His eyes were resolute despite the drugs. In that moment, I saw the strength of this child who had endured years of systematic abuse at the hands of those who should have protected him. My determination solidified into something cold and unbreakable. Victoria Anderson and Dr. Winters had no idea what was coming for them. They had been playing God with the child's life, and they were about to face a reckoning. I carefully secured the hair samples in sterile collection envelopes and hid them in a hollowed-out personal care product in my bathroom. Tomorrow, I would collect blood samples and begin documenting Elijah's true condition. The insurance review was our window of opportunity, and I intended to use it to its fullest potential. What Victoria didn't understand was that she wasn't facing just any caregiver. She was facing someone who had spent years building fraud cases, someone who knew exactly how to gather evidence, and someone who had the connections to ensure that justice would be served. The moment I walked out of Elijah's room that night, the clock started ticking on Victoria Anderson's perfect life. She just didn't know it yet. Over the next week, I executed my plan methodically, gathering evidence piece by piece while maintaining the facade of a compliant caregiver. Each action was calculated to build an airtight case while avoiding detection. My first priority was documenting Elijah's true condition. I knew from my fraud investigation days that video evidence was particularly compelling in court. The challenge was capturing Elijah's capabilities without Victoria or Dr. Winter's knowledge. I identified a 2-hour window each afternoon, when Victoria typically attended her social engagements. During this time, I established what I called private therapy sessions with Elijah, supposedly focusing on cognitive exercises. In reality, these sessions were carefully documented demonstrations of his true abilities. I positioned my phone discreetly to record these sessions, making sure the timestamp function was active. During the first session, after confirming all monitoring devices were disabled, I spoke clearly for the recording. Elijah, I'm going to reduce your medication dosage temporarily so we can document your true capabilities. Is that okay with you? He nodded, his eyes alert now that the morning dose had partially worn off. Can you tell me your full name and age for the record? With visible effort, he spoke slowly but clearly. Elijah James Anderson. I'm 10 years old. Can you tell me what you understand about your condition? He struggled to form the words, his speech clearly affected by years of unnecessary medication, but his meaning was unmistakable. I'm not. Really sick. Mom and Dr. Winters. Give me shots. Make me not walk. Say I'm autistic. But I'm not. How long has this been happening? Since I was 3, after I got really sick. Over the course of several sessions, I documented Elijah attempting to move his legs, demonstrating cognitive abilities well beyond what his medical records indicated, and communicating in increasingly complex sentences as I carefully adjusted his medication. I was taking a risk by altering his dosages, but I was medically trained and monitored him constantly for any adverse effects. The most dramatic evidence came on the 4th day. After nearly a week of slightly reduced medication, Elijah was able to stand with support for almost 30 seconds. It was clearly difficult and painful after years of muscle atrophy, but the video evidence of a supposedly paralyzed child standing was irrefutable. As he sank back into his wheelchair, exhausted from the effort, tears streamed down his face. You're doing amazingly well, Elijah, I said, squeezing his hand. This is exactly what we need. Will it be enough? He asked, his voice strained. It's just the beginning, I assured him. Simultaneously, I was building the medical evidence portion of my case. During Elijah's scheduled blood draws, I collected additional samples that I sent to Dr. Reyes, using a secure medical courier service I trusted from my previous career. I labeled these as confidential research samples, with a code name rather than Elijah's real name. Dr. Reyes called me 3 days later, her voice tense. Maria, the blood work is disturbing to say the least. The child has elevated levels of multiple sedatives and muscle relaxants, dangerously high for a pediatric patient. There are also traces of compounds that wouldn't typically be prescribed for his stated conditions. The combination would certainly cause muscle weakness, cognitive impairment, and other symptoms consistent with various neurological disorders. Could these medications cause permanent damage? I asked, dreading the answer. With prolonged use at these levels? Absolutely. Whoever is doing this is systematically disabling this child. This goes beyond malpractice. It's assault. I need your findings documented officially, but without revealing the source yet. I'll prepare a comprehensive toxicology report. But Maria, this child needs immediate medical intervention. How much longer will this continue? Not much longer, I promised. The evidence is nearly complete. The third component of my investigation focused on the financial motive. This required more subtlety and risk. I needed to access records that would be kept in Victoria's study, or the wall safe I had discovered. The opportunity came when Victoria hosted a dinner party for her charity board. The household was busy with caterers and staff, creating enough chaos to cover my movements. I slipped into her study under the pretense of delivering updated medical notes for her review. The safe was my target, but I needed the combination. After careful observation over several days, I had noticed Victoria frequently checking her phone before opening the safe. On a hunch, I positioned myself where I could see her screen during one of these moments. and glimpsed a note labeled "Safe" with a 6-digit code. During the dinner party, I returned to the study with the household manager's master key, which I had borrowed briefly. The combination worked on my first attempt. Inside the safe were several files, including one labeled Elijah Insurance and another marked Winters Agreements. Working quickly, I photographed every document. The insurance file contained the original policy, a $5 million permanent disability policy, taken out when Elijah was just 2 years old, with Victoria as the sole beneficiary. There were quarterly payment statements showing that over $2 million had already been disbursed for Elijah's care since the diagnosis. Alongside these were bank statements showing transfers from Victoria's personal account to an offshore account, money that was supposed to be for Elijah's treatment and equipment, but was clearly being diverted. Even more damning was the file containing agreements with Dr. Winters. These weren't medical documents. They were payment schedules. Dr. Winters had received over $500, $0 in consulting fees, since Elijah's diagnosis. There was also a contract stipulating an additional $1 million payment to the doctor contingent on the insurance policy remaining in effect until Elijah turned 18. I had found the smoking gun, written evidence of a conspiracy to defraud the insurance company and harm a child for financial gain. I photographed everything meticulously before returning the documents to the safe and locking it exactly as I had found it. With this crucial evidence secured, I moved to the next phase of my plan, establishing the legal framework for action. I needed to ensure that when I exposed Victoria and Dr. Winters, the response would be immediate and devastating. I contacted James Whitaker again, this time with concrete evidence. "I have everything," I told him. Medical documentation of deliberate over-medication, video evidence of the child's true capabilities, and financial records showing the motive and conspiracy. "That's a solid case," James acknowledged. "But Maria, we need to involve Child Protective Services and law enforcement simultaneously. This isn't just insurance fraud, it's child abuse." "I know, but timing is critical. Victoria and Dr. Winters are intensifying their efforts because of an upcoming insurance review. If we move too soon, they might destroy evidence or worse, increase the child's medication to dangerous levels." We formulated a coordinated approach. James would prepare the insurance fraud case while I contacted Detective Sarah Moss, a former colleague who specialized in crimes against children. Sarah agreed to assemble a team, but emphasized the need for a warrant before action could be taken. "The problem is the father," I explained to Sarah during our call. "From everything I've observed, Richard Anderson seems to genuinely believe his son is disabled. He's frequently away on business, and Victoria has managed all aspects of Elijah's care since the beginning. He's as much a victim of her deception as Elijah is." "That complicates things," Sarah admitted. "If he's unaware of the fraud, he could inadvertently alert Victoria if approached by investigators. Which is why we need to time this perfectly." The final piece fell into place when I discovered that Richard would be returning from a business trip the day before the scheduled insurance review. This created the perfect window. Victoria and Dr. Winters would be focused on preparing Elijah for the review, while Richard's presence would provide an opportunity to approach him separately. 2 days before the insurance evaluation, I made my most dangerous move. I needed access to Dr. Winters' medical records on Elijah, the actual records, not the fabricated versions Victoria kept in the house. I knew from my investigations that Dr. Winters maintained a private office separate from his main practice for his special patients. Using contacts from my previous career, I obtained Dr. Winters' office address and scheduled a surveillance. I observed his patterns for a full day, noting when he arrived and left, and which staff members were present. The office was small, just Dr. Winters, a receptionist who left at 5 p.m., and a nurse who worked the same hours. The opportunity came when Dr. Winters left for lunch. I approached the office wearing professional attire and carrying a medical courier bag, a disguise that would raise no suspicions in a doctor's office. "I'm here to pick up the Anderson file for Dr. Winters," I told the receptionist confidently. "He's meeting with the insurance review board this afternoon and needs the complete medical history." The receptionist hesitated. He usually handles the Anderson case personally. "It's urgent," I pressed. "The review was moved up. He's already at the meeting and called me directly to bring the file." I showed her a text message I had prepared on my phone, apparently from Dr. Winters. The ruse worked. She retrieved a thick file from a locked cabinet and handed it to me. "Make sure he gets this back today. It's his only complete copy. Of course, he'll have it by the end of his meeting." Once safely away from the office, I took the file to a small copy shop, where I had prearranged for a private room. I photographed every page, carefully preserving the order and ensuring nothing was damaged. The contents were even more disturbing than I had anticipated. Dr. Winters had maintained 2 separate sets of records, the official version showing Elijah's supposed disabilities, and a second treatment record documenting the deliberate administration of drugs to induce symptoms. There were notes on dosage adjustments when Elijah showed signs of improvement, and contingency plans for maintaining the appearance of disability during evaluations. Most horrifying were the notes from when Elijah was 3 years old. He had indeed suffered a severe viral infection, but according to Dr. Winters' private notes, he had recovered normally. The decision to begin the fraud had come afterward, when Victoria approached the doctor with her scheme. The early entries showed hesitation from Dr. Winters, followed by notes about the significant compensation package that had apparently overcome his ethical concerns. I returned the file to Dr. Winters' office later that afternoon, using the same courier pretext. The receptionist accepted it without question, and I left knowing I had the final piece of evidence needed to destroy both Victoria and Dr. Winters. That evening, I compiled all the evidence into a comprehensive file. The blood test results, the video recordings, the financial documents, and the medical records. I made 3 identical copies, one for James at the Insurance Fraud Division, one for Detective Moss, and one as a backup secured in a cloud account only I could access. The next morning, I delivered the physical copies to my contacts, setting up a coordinated response for the following day, the day of the insurance review and Richard's return. "We'll be ready," James confirmed. "The insurance investigator has been briefed. He'll arrive as scheduled, but will be working with us." Detective Moss was equally prepared. "I've secured an emergency warrant based on the evidence you provided. We'll have a team in place, including medical professionals, to evaluate the child immediately." Everything was in place. That night, as I sat with Elijah during his evening routine, I could see that Victoria and Dr. Winters had significantly increased his medication in preparation for the review. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow. "Just one more day," I whispered to him, checking his vital signs carefully to ensure he wasn't in immediate danger. "Tomorrow, this all ends." I had deliberately maintained my role as the compliant, unremarkable caregiver throughout my investigation. Victoria had become less suspicious of me as I appeared to follow her instructions precisely. Little did she know that her sense of security was exactly what I had engineered. The calm before the storm that would destroy her world. On the morning of the insurance review, Victoria was tense but confident. Dr. Winters arrived early to administer a final round of medications to ensure Elijah would present the expected symptoms. I assisted as required, maintaining my facade of cooperation while secretly documenting every action they took. "The insurance investigator will arrive at noon," Victoria informed me. "Ensure Elijah is properly dressed and positioned in his wheelchair. Dr. Winters and I will handle all questions." "Yes, Mrs. Anderson," I replied demurely. What Victoria didn't know was that at that very moment, Richard Anderson's plane was landing. He would be home within hours, just in time to witness the unraveling of his wife's elaborate fraud. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. Years of abuse, deception, and greed were about to face a reckoning that neither Victoria nor Dr. Winters would see coming until it was far too late. At precisely noon, the doorbell rang. Victoria, dressed in an elegant but conservative outfit that projected the image of a devoted mother, went to greet the insurance investigator. Dr. Winters remained in Elijah's room, making last-minute adjustments to his appearance, ensuring the wheelchair was positioned properly, checking that his limbs displayed the appropriate limpness. The investigator was a middle-aged man named Robert Keller, professionally dressed and carrying a briefcase. I recognized him immediately as one of James Whittaker's most experienced fraud investigators, though I gave no indication of this recognition. "Mrs. Anderson," he said formally, shaking Victoria's hand. "Thank you for accommodating this review. It's standard procedure for long-term disability claims of this magnitude." "Of course," Victoria replied with practiced warmth. "We understand completely. We want everything to be properly documented for Elijah's care." She led him to Elijah's room, where Dr. Winters stood ready with medical charts and a prepared statement about Elijah's condition. I remained in the background, playing my role as the silent, efficient caregiver. "This is Dr. Winters, Elijah's primary physician since birth," Victoria introduced. "He can answer any medical questions you might have." Dr. Winters stepped forward, exuding professional confidence. "I've prepared a comprehensive summary of Elijah's condition and treatment protocols. His case is quite complex, a combination of severe autism spectrum disorder and physical disabilities resulting from a rare neurological condition." Keller nodded, his expression neutral as he accepted the documents. "I'd like to speak with Elijah, if possible." "He's nonverbal," Victoria interjected quickly. "He communicates through very basic gestures at best. Today is not one of his better days." I glanced at Elijah, who was slumped in his wheelchair, his eyes unfocused from the heavy medication they had administered. The sight strengthened my resolve. "Nevertheless," Keller insisted, "I need to observe him as part of our assessment." For the next hour, Keller conducted a thorough evaluation. He asked detailed questions about Elijah's care, his medical history, and the progression of his symptoms. Dr. Winters answered smoothly, presenting the fabricated narrative they had perfected over years. Victoria added emotional details about the challenges of raising a severely disabled child and how the insurance payments had been essential for providing him with proper care. Throughout this performance, I noticed Keller making specific notes and occasionally glancing at his watch. He was stalling, waiting for the coordinated intervention we had planned. At precisely 1:30 p.m., the household manager appeared at the door. "Mrs. Anderson, Mr. Anderson has arrived home and is asking to join you." A flicker of annoyance crossed Victoria's perfect features before she composed herself. "How wonderful. Please send him in." Richard Anderson entered the room, looking tired from travel, but immediately brightening at the sight of his son. "Elijah, I've missed you, buddy." He crouched beside the wheelchair, his face falling slightly at Elijah's unresponsive state. "Is he okay? He seems more sedated than usual." "It's just one of his bad days, dear," Victoria said smoothly, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Mr. Keller here is from the insurance company, conducting a routine review." Richard shook Keller's hand distractedly, his concern focused on his son. "I wish you could have seen him yesterday during our video call. He was much more alert." I saw panic flash in Victoria's eyes. "Richard, you know how variable his condition can be. Mr. Keller understands that we're seeing him on a particularly difficult day." Keller checked his watch again. "Actually, Mrs. Anderson, I'd like to ask a few more questions. In private, if possible." Before Victoria could respond, the doorbell rang again. This time it was not a single ring, but an insistent, authoritative buzz. "Who could that be?" Victoria asked, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Ms. Fernandez, would you please see who it is?" I nodded and left the room, my heart racing. I knew exactly who it was. As I opened the front door, Detective Moss stood there with 4 officers, 2 in uniform and 2 in plainclothes. Behind them was a medical team, including Dr. Elena Reyes. "Detective Sarah Moss, Boston Police Department," she announced, showing her badge. "We have a warrant to search these premises and to conduct an immediate medical evaluation of Elijah Anderson." I stepped aside, allowing them to enter. "He's upstairs, 3rd floor, East Wing. Dr. Winters and both parents are with him now, along with an insurance investigator." Detective Moss gave me a subtle nod of acknowledgement before leading her team up the grand staircase. I followed them back to Elijah's room, where Victoria's perfectly controlled world was about to implode. As we entered, Victoria rose to her feet, her face a mask of outraged confusion. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "You cannot just barge into our home." Detective Moss presented the warrant. "Mrs. Anderson, we have reason to believe that your son is being medically abused for the purpose of insurance fraud. This warrant authorizes us to search your home and to have Elijah examined by independent medical professionals immediately." Richard's face drained of color. What are you talking about?" Dr. Winters stepped forward, his professional demeanor suddenly defensive. "This is outrageous. I've been treating this child since birth. He has well-documented medical conditions." "Documented by you," Keller interjected, dropping his facade of neutrality. "Robert Keller, Special Investigator, Insurance Fraud Division. We've been working with the police on this investigation." Victoria turned to me, sudden realization dawning in her eyes. "You," she hissed. "What have you done?" I stepped forward, finally abandoning my role as the submissive caregiver. "My name is Maria Fernandez. Before I became a caregiver, I was a certified medical fraud investigator for the State Insurance Board. I've documented extensive evidence of deliberate medical abuse and insurance fraud in this household." Richard looked between his wife and me, confusion and horror battling on his face. "Victoria, what is she talking about?" "Don't listen to her," Victoria snapped. "She's clearly unstable. We need to call our lawyer immediately." Dr. Reyes and her team had already moved to Elijah, beginning a preliminary examination. "This child is heavily sedated," she announced. "I'm detecting respiratory depression consistent with benzodiazepine overdose. We need to get him to a hospital immediately." "You can't take my son!" Victoria lunged toward Elijah, but was blocked by one of the officers. "Mrs. Anderson," Detective Moss said firmly, "step back or you will be restrained." As the medical team prepared to move Elijah, Dr. Reyes turned to Richard. "Sir, your son has been systematically over-medicated with a combination of drugs that would induce symptoms mimicking neurological disorders and developmental disabilities. The blood work indicates long-term exposure to these substances." Richard turned to Dr. Winters in disbelief. "Is this true?" Dr. Winters' professional composure crumbled. "Mr. Anderson, your son's condition is complex. The medication regimen is necessary to maintain the appearance of disability," I interrupted, pulling out copies of the documents I had photographed. "These are records from Dr. Winters' private files, documenting a deliberate scheme to disable Elijah for insurance payments. And these," I continued, producing the financial records, "show transfers of over $500 from your wife to Dr. Winters, separate from any legitimate medical payments." Victoria's face contorted with rage. "You had no right to access private medical records. This is all inadmissible." "Actually," Detective Moss responded, "the evidence was legally obtained through proper channels, and the warrant was issued based on substantial documentation of child endangerment." As the reality of the situation sank in, Victoria's strategy shifted. She turned to Richard, her voice suddenly soft and pleading. "Richard, you know me. You know how much I love Elijah. This is all a terrible misunderstanding." Richard stared at her, his expression hardening as the pieces fell into place. "All these years, you told me he was born this way. You said the medications were helping him." "They were," They are. His condition is real. I stepped forward again. Mr. Anderson, I've been reducing Elijah's medication under careful supervision when your wife wasn't present. He can speak. He can stand with support. He has no signs of autism when not heavily medicated. That's impossible, Richard whispered, but the doubt was clear in his voice. We have video evidence, I said gently. I took out my phone and played one of the recordings I had made. Elijah speaking clearly, identifying himself, explaining what had been done to him. The color drained from Victoria's face as her husband watched the video, his expression moving from shock to grief to fury. You did this to our son? Richard's voice was barely a whisper. You deliberately crippled him? For money? Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. You were never here, she screamed, always traveling, building your precious company. Do you know what it was like being left alone with a hyperactive toddler? I gave up everything for this family. The policy was our security, my security. Dr. Winters chose that moment to make a desperate move. He lunged for his medical bag, perhaps hoping to destroy evidence, but was immediately restrained by one of the officers. Dr. Alan Winters, Detective Moss announced, you are under arrest for aggravated child abuse, medical malpractice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and endangerment of a minor. As the officers handcuffed Dr. Winters, Victoria seemed to realize the full magnitude of her situation. Her perfect life, her social standing, her freedom, all of it was crumbling before her eyes. She made one last desperate attempt to salvage her position. Richard, she pleaded, you can stop this. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. We can fix this together. But Richard Anderson was beyond reaching. He had moved to Elijah's side, holding his son's hand as the medical team prepared him for transport. Victoria Anderson, Detective Moss continued, you are under arrest for aggravated child abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and endangerment of a minor. As the second officer approached with handcuffs, Victoria's aristocratic demeanor finally collapsed completely. She began screaming, a high, hysterical sound that echoed through the mansion. You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? Do you know who my husband is? The officers led her from the room, still screaming threats and accusations. Dr. Winters followed in a state of stunned silence, his career and freedom effectively over. In the sudden quiet that followed their departure, I approached Richard, who was watching the medical team prepare his son for transport. Mr. Anderson, I said gently, Elijah is going to need specialized care to safely detoxify from these medications. Dr. Reyes is one of the best neurologists in the state. She'll oversee his recovery. Richard looked at me, tears streaming down his face. How long have you known? I suspected something was wrong from my first day. Elijah confirmed it himself about 2 weeks ago. I've been building the case since then. And I never noticed, he whispered. His own father. And I never saw what was happening to him. You weren't meant to see it, I assured him. The deception was elaborate and involved medical professionals you trusted. But what matters now is that Elijah has a chance at recovery. As they wheeled Elijah toward the door, his eyes fluttered open briefly. Despite the heavy sedation, he seemed to recognize that something momentous had happened. His gaze found mine, and I saw a flicker of understanding, even hope, before the medications pulled him back under. The house that had been Elijah's prison for 7 years was now a crime scene. Officers methodically searched each room, collecting evidence that would further build the case against Victoria and Dr. Winters. The household staff gathered in shocked clusters, trying to process the sudden implosion of the Anderson family. As I prepared to follow the ambulance to the hospital, James Whitaker approached me in the foyer. Hell of a case, Maria, he said quietly. Reminds me why you are the best in the division. This one was personal, I replied. When it involves a child. He nodded in understanding. The insurance company is already initiating proceedings to recover the fraudulently obtained funds. They'll also be pursuing additional damages. Good. Use some of that money for Elijah's rehabilitation. Already in the works. The company's making it a priority to fund his recovery. James hesitated, then added, "You know, there's still a position open in our division if you ever want to come back." I smiled but shook my head. "I think I'm where I need to be. There are other vulnerable people who need protection." As I left the mansion that had been the setting for such calculated cruelty, I felt no triumph or satisfaction. Only relief that Elijah's ordeal was finally over, and determination to see his recovery through to the end. Victoria's perfect world had shattered, as it deserved to, but the real victory would be seeing Elijah walk again, speak freely, and reclaim the childhood that had been stolen from him. The Anderson mansion grew smaller in the distance, as I followed the ambulance carrying Elijah to the hospital. Behind me lay the wreckage of Victoria's scheme. Ahead lay the long, difficult path of healing for a child who had endured the unthinkable at the hands of his own mother. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of Elijah's physical therapy room at Boston Children's Rehabilitation Center, watching as he took careful, determined steps between parallel bars. Each movement was a victory, the result of months of intensive therapy after years of forced immobility. "Look, Maria," he called out, his voice stronger and clearer than it had been even a week ago. 3 whole lengths today." "That's amazing, Elijah," I replied, unable to keep the emotion from my voice. "You're making incredible progress." Dr. Reyes stood nearby, monitoring his movements with professional attention, but undisguised pride. "His muscle tone improves weekly," she told me quietly. "The neurological damage wasn't as permanent as we feared. Children have remarkable resilience." Elijah had spent the first month after his rescue in intensive medical care, undergoing a carefully managed detoxification process to remove the cocktail of drugs that had been in his system for years. It had been a difficult period. His body struggled with withdrawal symptoms, and he experienced significant pain as sensation returned to long-suppressed nerves and muscles. But through it all, his determination never wavered. Each small victory, the first time he could hold a pencil steadily, the day he spoke a complete paragraph without fatigue, the morning he managed to stand unassisted for a full minute, was celebrated by the team of specialists working with him. Richard Anderson had been transformed by the ordeal. The distracted, frequently absent father was gone, replaced by a man wholly devoted to his son's recovery. He had taken an extended leave from his company to be present for every treatment, every therapy session, every milestone in Elijah's journey. "Maria," Richard greeted me warmly as he entered the room with coffee cups for the adults. "I was hoping you'd make it today." Though I was no longer Elijah's official caregiver, he had a team of legitimate medical professionals now. I visited regularly. Something profound had connected us through the experience of breaking free from Victoria's control. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. "Especially not today." Today marked an important milestone. The criminal cases against Victoria Anderson and Dr. Alan Winters had reached their conclusions, and we had promised to explain the outcomes to Elijah once his therapy session was complete. As Elijah finished his exercises and was helped into a specialized chair that offered more support than a wheelchair but still allowed him to practice sitting independently, Richard and I exchanged glances. It was time. "Elijah," Richard began carefully, "you remember we told you that your mother and Dr. Winters would have to answer for what they did to you?" Elijah nodded solemnly. At 11 years old now, he had a maturity beyond his years, an inevitable result of his experiences. "The judge made the final decision today," I explained, sitting beside him. "Both of them pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. Which means they admitted what they did was wrong," Richard added, his voice tight with controlled anger. "What happens to them now?" Elijah asked, his hands fidgeting slightly. a nervous habit he'd developed as the drugs left his system and his natural movements returned. I took his hand gently. Dr. Winters has lost his medical license permanently. He can never practice medicine again. He's been sentenced to 15 years in prison for what he did to you and potentially other children. Other children? Elijah's eyes widened. Richard nodded grimly. After his arrest, 2 other families came forward with similar stories. The investigation is still ongoing, but it appears you weren't his only victim. This had been one of the most shocking discoveries in the aftermath. Dr. Winters had apparently been involved in at least 2 other cases of medical child abuse for financial gain. The scope of his crimes was still being uncovered. And Mom? Elijah asked, his voice smaller. Richard and I had discussed how to handle this part extensively. The truth was important, but so was Elijah's emotional well-being. Your mother will be in prison for 20 years, I said gently. The judge gave her a longer sentence because she was your parent, the person who should have protected you most. Elijah absorbed this information silently, his expression unreadable. Despite everything Victoria had done to him, she was still his mother, and the complexity of his feelings toward her was something he would likely struggle with for years to come. She also has to pay back all the insurance money, Richard added, and there will be additional financial penalties. What happens to that money? Elijah asked practically. Most of it is going into a trust for you, Richard explained. For your ongoing medical care, education, and your future. It's being managed by an independent trustee to ensure it's only used for your benefit. A portion is also going to establish a foundation, I added. The Elijah Anderson Foundation for Victims of Medical Abuse. It will help other children who have been harmed by medical professionals or caretakers. This had been Richard's idea, turning the money that had motivated Victoria's cruelty into a force for healing and prevention. The foundation would fund research, support victims, and train medical professionals to identify and report suspected cases of medical child abuse. Elijah sat with this information for a long moment, then looked up with determination in his eyes. I want to help with the foundation. When I'm better. I want to tell my story so other kids might be saved sooner. Richard's eyes filled with tears. I think that's a wonderful idea, buddy. The criminal proceedings had only been one part of the aftermath. The civil repercussions had been equally significant. Barton Life Insurance had filed a massive lawsuit against Victoria, Dr. Winters, and the medical practice that had employed him. The Insurance Fraud Division, led by James Whitaker, had conducted a thorough investigation that uncovered additional falsified claims and kickback schemes. The Anderson name had been dragged through the media, of course. The story was too sensational to ignore. A socialite mother deliberately disabling her child for insurance money, a respected doctor participating in the scheme, a father kept in the dark, and a caregiver who exposed it all. For weeks it had dominated local headlines and even garnered national attention. Richard had handled the publicity with surprising grace, refusing to hide the truth but keeping Elijah himself shielded from the worst of the exposure. He had given one comprehensive interview to a respected journalist, explaining the situation factually and focusing on the importance of oversight in both medical and insurance systems. We also had a meeting with your school yesterday, Richard told Elijah, changing to a more positive subject. They're very excited about you joining in January. They've made all the accommodations we discussed for your continuing physical therapy, and there's a full-time nurse on staff. Elijah's face lit up. Real school, with other kids. Real school, I confirmed, smiling at his excitement. After years of isolation, the prospect of normal social interaction was perhaps even more thrilling to him than his physical recovery. Dr. Reyes joined our conversation, clipboard in hand. Elijah's latest cognitive assessments are excellent, she reported. Now that the medications are completely out of his system, he's testing above grade level in several subjects, particularly mathematics and reading comprehension. That doesn't surprise me at all, I said. recalling how quickly Elijah had absorbed information even while heavily medicated. He's always been exceptionally bright. As our meeting concluded and Elijah was taken for his hydrotherapy session, Richard and I walked to the hospital cafeteria for a quiet conversation. "I never properly thanked you," he said as we sat with our coffee. "If you hadn't recognized what was happening." "You don't need to thank me," I assured him. "Seeing Elijah recover is thanks enough." "Still, you risked a lot. Victoria could have fired you at any time if she'd realized what you were doing." "Some risks are worth taking," I said simply. Richard nodded, understanding. "The house is sold," he said, changing subjects. "I finalized the paperwork yesterday." "That's good news." The mansion had too many dark memories for both Richard and Elijah. They had moved to a comfortable but less ostentatious home closer to the rehabilitation center shortly after Victoria's arrest. "We're going to use part of the proceeds to fund a research position at Boston Children's," Richard continued, focused specifically on recovery from long-term medication damage in pediatric patients. This was another way Richard had channeled his guilt and grief into positive action. Though he had been deceived by Victoria and Dr. Winters, he still felt responsible for not recognizing what was happening to his son. Creating systematic change in how such cases were handled was his way of ensuring other children wouldn't suffer as Elijah had. "That's wonderful," I said. "It will make a real difference." "Which brings me to something I wanted to discuss with you." Richard leaned forward, his expression serious. "The Elijah Anderson Foundation needs a director, someone with medical knowledge, experience in identifying fraud and abuse, and a genuine commitment to protecting vulnerable children." I raised an eyebrow, seeing where this was heading. "I can't think of anyone better qualified than you, Maria. You have the perfect combination of skills and compassion. The position comes with a substantial salary, full benefits, and the opportunity to build something meaningful from the ground up." The offer was unexpected, but immediately appealing. My time as a caregiver had always been rewarding, but the chance to help multiple children on a systemic level, to potentially prevent abuses like what Elijah had endured, was compelling. "I'd need some time to think about it," I said carefully. "Of course," Richard nodded. "Take all the time you need. The position will be there when you're ready." As I left the hospital that afternoon, I felt a sense of closure that had been building over the months since Victoria's arrest. The case that had begun with my suspicions in a cold clinical mansion room had transformed not only Elijah's life, but also the lives of everyone connected to him. Victoria's perfect world had indeed shattered beyond repair. Her social standing was destroyed, her freedom taken away, her wealth diminished, and her reputation permanently ruined. News reports indicated that she had been a model prisoner thus far, perhaps calculating that good behavior might eventually lead to early release. But the cold, hard reality of her situation had apparently broken through her denial. According to Richard, who had visited her once at the insistence of their family therapist, she had finally expressed remorse, though whether it was genuine or simply another manipulation was impossible to know. Dr. Winters had fared even worse. The medical community had closed ranks against him, his former colleagues denouncing his actions. Additional investigations had uncovered a pattern of questionable practices extending back over a decade. His prestigious career was not just ended but retroactively tainted, his research and publications withdrawn from medical journals, his name becoming synonymous with the worst kind of medical betrayal. In prison, separated from the wealth and status that had defined his life, he had reportedly fallen into a deep depression. The household staff from the Anderson mansion had been questioned extensively during the investigation. Most had been unaware of the full extent of the abuse, though several admitted to having suspicions they had been afraid to voice. Mrs. Patel, the cook who had given me my first hint about Elijah's true history, had been offered a position in Richard and Elijah's new home, which she had gratefully accepted. Marcus, the security guard who had confirmed that Elijah had once walked normally, had provided crucial testimony during the legal proceedings. He now worked as part of Elijah's security detail, a necessary precaution given the high-profile nature of the case and the substantial trust fund now associated with the boy's name. 3 weeks later, I accepted Richard's offer to direct the Elijah Anderson Foundation. The position allowed me to combine my investigative skills with my caregiving experience in a way that felt both natural and purposeful. We established offices in downtown Boston, developed training programs for medical professionals, and created support services for families affected by medical abuse. 1 year to the day after Victoria's arrest, I stood in the back of an auditorium at Boston Children's Hospital, watching as Elijah walked slowly but steadily across the stage to deliver a brief speech at the official launch of the foundation. His voice was clear and confident as he addressed the audience of medical professionals, child welfare advocates, and donors. "What happened to me shouldn't happen to any child," he said, his hands gripping the podium for support, but his gaze steady. "But because it did, we now have the opportunity to make sure it doesn't happen to others. Sometimes the worst experiences can lead to the most important changes." As applause filled the room, I caught Richard's eye across the crowd. We shared a moment of quiet understanding, acknowledging the horror that had brought us here, but also the healing that had followed. Elijah was not fully recovered yet. He still required regular physical therapy, and there were emotional scars that would take much longer to heal than his physical ones. But he was no longer a prisoner in his own body, no longer silenced by drugs and deception. He was reclaiming his life day by day, his natural intelligence and resilience shining through. Victoria had believed she could control and contain her son, using him as a means to financial security while denying him the most basic rights of movement, expression, and development. She had created an elaborate fiction of disability and devoted herself to maintaining that fiction at any cost to Elijah's well-being. But in the end, the truth had broken through. The carefully constructed prison she had built for her son had crumbled, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions, while Elijah walked free, literally and figuratively, toward a future full of possibilities she had tried to deny him. As the Foundation's work expanded over the following years, we identified and helped dozens of children in situations similar to Elijah's. Some cases involved parents with Munchausen by proxy syndrome, others were insurance fraud schemes, and some were medical professionals who had become complicit in abusive practices. Each case reinforced the importance of our mission, and each child rescued provided validation for the path we had chosen. Elijah himself became an increasingly effective advocate as he grew older. By age 13, he was walking independently, though he would always have some mobility limitations due to the years of muscle atrophy during crucial developmental stages. By 15, he was excelling academically and had developed a particular interest in bioethics and patient rights, fields where his personal experience gave him unique insights. 5 years after Victoria's conviction, I received a call from the prison where she was serving her sentence. She had requested to speak with me, not with Richard or Elijah, whom she was legally barred from contacting, but specifically with me. After consulting with Richard and Elijah's therapist, I agreed to the meeting. Victoria Anderson had aged dramatically in prison. The perfectly coiffed blonde hair was now streaked with gray and cut in a practical prison style. The designer clothes were replaced by a standard-issue uniform. The manicured hands that had once administered harmful medications to her own child were now bare and roughened by prison work. "Thank you for coming," she said, as we sat across from each other in the visitation room. Her voice was subdued, lacking the imperious tone I remembered. "I know you have no reason to do me any favors. I'm here out of professional interest," I replied neutrally. "And because Elijah's therapy team thought it might provide closure." She nodded, accepting this limitation. "How is he?" "Thriving," I said simply. "He's recovered far more physical function than the doctors initially predicted. He's top of his class academically. He has friends, activities, a normal teenage life." Something like genuine pain flickered across Victoria's face. "Good. That's good." "Is that what you wanted to know?" She shook her head. I wanted to tell you that I understand now what I did. The prison psychologists call it a combination of narcissistic personality disorder and financial desperation, with elements of Munchausen by proxy. Clinical terms for a mother who poisoned her child for money. Her voice broke on the last word. I remained silent, watching her. I've had 5 years to think about it, she continued. 5 years to replay every injection, every lie, every moment I chose my comfort over his life. I was so convinced I deserved that money, that lifestyle. I told myself he wouldn't remember, that he didn't understand, that it wasn't really harming him. But you knew it was, I said quietly. The records showed you increased the dosages whenever he showed signs of improvement. You actively worked to prevent his recovery. She didn't deny it. Yes, and there's no excuse for that. None. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I know I'll never have a relationship with my son again. That's the consequence of my actions, and I accept it. Then why am I here? Because I want you to know that the Foundation's work matters. There are other children out there with parents like me who have convinced themselves that what they're doing isn't really abuse, who have doctors like Alan willing to look the other way for the right price. She leaned forward, her expression intense. I'm cooperating with every investigation. I've provided names, dates, connections, everything I know about other potential cases. This was news to me, and potentially valuable information for the Foundation's work. The investigators should have that information already, I noted. They do, but I wanted you to know personally that I'm doing what little I can to try to make amends. Not to reduce my sentence. I deserve every day of it, but because it's the only thing left I can do that matters. I studied her carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or deception, traits that had defined her character during my time in her home. But all I saw was a broken woman who had lost everything and had finally, belatedly, recognized the magnitude of her crimes. I'll make sure the Foundation follows up on your information, I said finally. As I stood to leave, Victoria spoke once more. Ms. Fernandez, Maria, thank you. Not for coming today, but for what you did then. For seeing what was happening when no one else would. For saving my son from me. I nodded once, then left without looking back. I had no forgiveness to offer Victoria Anderson. That wasn't my place. But I could acknowledge that even in the darkest hearts, recognition of wrongdoing was possible. Whether that recognition led to genuine redemption was not for me to judge. 10 years after Elijah's rescue, the Elijah Anderson Foundation had become one of the most respected child advocacy organizations in the country. We had expanded to offices in 5 major cities, with specialized teams of investigators, medical professionals, and legal experts working together to identify and intervene in cases of medical child abuse. Elijah himself, now 20 years old, was preparing to enter medical school with a focus on pediatric neurology, determined to understand and help treat the very conditions that had been falsely attributed to him as a child. Though he would always have some physical limitations, he had developed compensatory strategies and had a determination that impressed everyone who worked with him. Richard had become a devoted advocate for child welfare legislation, using his considerable influence in the business world to push for stronger protections and oversight in both medical and insurance systems. The guilt he had initially felt for not recognizing his son's abuse had transformed into purposeful action that was changing lives across the country. Dr. Winters died in prison of a stroke 8 years into his sentence, his legacy one of shame rather than the medical prestige he had once enjoyed. Victoria remained incarcerated, continuing to cooperate with investigations and occasionally providing valuable information that led to the identification of other cases. As for me, directing the Foundation became more than a career. It became a calling. Each case we handled, each child we helped, reinforced the importance of remaining vigilant and trusting my instincts when something seemed wrong. The specialized knowledge I had developed in both my investigative career and my time as a caregiver had found its perfect application. On the 10th anniversary of the Foundation's establishment, we held a gala fundraiser at the Boston Children's Hospital. The highlight of the evening was Elijah's address to the assembled donors, medical professionals, and advocates. He stood tall at the podium, his movements fluid despite the slight limp that remained as a permanent reminder of his past. His voice, once silenced by medications and fear, filled the room with confidence and passion. 10 years ago, I was a prisoner in my own body, he began. Trapped by medications I didn't need, diagnosed with conditions I didn't have, and used as a pawn in a scheme that prioritized money over my life and development. The room was silent, hundreds of people hanging on every word of his powerful testimony. Today, I stand before you not as a victim, but as living proof that intervention works, that healing is possible, and that the cycle of abuse can be broken. The foundation that bears my name has helped identify and rescue 127 children in situations similar to mine over the past decade. Children who might otherwise have lost years of their lives, or their lives entirely, to medical abuse. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the audience. But our work is far from complete. For every case we identify, there are others still suffering in silence, their conditions fabricated or exaggerated by the very people meant to protect them. Tonight, I ask for your continued support, not just with your donations, but with your vigilance. Medical child abuse thrives in shadows and silence. By bringing it into the light, by refusing to look away from uncomfortable truths, each of you becomes part of the solution. As he concluded his speech to thunderous applause, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. What had begun as subtle inconsistencies noticed by a careful observer had evolved into a movement that was saving lives and changing systems. The quiet, methodical investigation I had conducted in the Anderson mansion had rippled outward, creating waves of change that continued to spread. Elijah found me at the reception afterward, making his way through well-wishers to reach my side. I don't think I ever properly thanked you, he said, echoing his father's words from years before. You don't need to, I replied. Seeing you like this, living your life, pursuing your dreams, that's all the thanks I need. He smiled, the confident smile of a young man with his future ahead of him, rather than the tentative expression of a child afraid to hope. Still, I want you to know that I remember everything. Those first days when you noticed something was wrong. The way you spoke to me like a person, not a diagnosis. The risks you took to gather evidence. You didn't just save my life, Maria. You gave me back my future. As we stood together, surrounded by the tangible results of our work, the foundation staff, the medical professionals now trained to recognize abuse, the legal experts who had helped strengthen child protection laws, I thought about Victoria Anderson and the perfect world she had tried to build on her son's suffering. That world had shattered beyond repair, as it deserved to. But from its ruins, something far more valuable had emerged. Truth, justice, and a legacy of protection for other vulnerable children. Elijah had reclaimed his life, his voice, and his future. And in doing so, he had ensured that his mother's cruelty would not be her only legacy. Instead, his triumph over her abuse would define them both in history. Her name a cautionary tale, his a beacon of hope and resilience. The perfect world Victoria had constructed was built on lies, manipulation, and cruelty. It had fallen as all such constructions eventually must. But the world Elijah was helping to build, one of transparency, compassion, and justice, had foundations that would endure far beyond any of us. That was the true victory. Not just exposing one case of abuse, but creating a system that would continue to protect vulnerable children long after our individual roles in the story had ended. A victory not of vengeance, but of transformation, turning unimaginable cruelty into a force for lasting change. As Elijah moved away to speak with other guests, I watched him go with quiet pride. The broken child in the wheelchair, silenced by medications and isolation, was now a confident young man striding toward a future full of purpose and possibility. It was the most powerful refutation possible of his mother's crimes, living proof that truth, eventually, will find its way to the light. And in that light, the darkest abuses cannot survive.